Dictators usually face a violent end. But in some cases, dictatorship is transferred within the family from one generation to the other. But sometimes, under very rare circumstances, the next generation bears the mantle of democracy and prefers popularity over suppression. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a look at some of the most brutal and longest-serving dictators and what path was taken by their subsequent generation. So we start with Joseph Stalin, who had 2 wives and 3 children from them. Stalin's first wife was a laundrywoman and a dressmaker named Yekaterina. But she died of typhus at a very young age of 22, and Stalin supposedly was immensely heartbroken at her death. At the time of her death, Stalin had an 8-month-old son from her, Yakov Jugasvili. Yes, Jugasvili was the actual last name of Stalin before he adopted the Stalin last name. So after the death of his first wife, Stalin got busy with his party activities, and Yakov was brought up by Yekaterina's aunt. And the next time that Yakov met Joseph Stalin was at the age of 14 when he moved from Georgia to join him in Moscow. Stalin did not like his first son for 2 main reasons. One was that he reminded him of his first wife, who he missed a lot. And secondly, he was very unlike him. He could not speak Russian, he was very shy, and these things did not go well with Stalin. When World War II began, Stalin insisted that Yakov sign up to go to the front. He did join the front, but by August 1941, he was taken prisoner and spent the next 2 years of his life in concentration camps. A story is often circulated that the Germans offered Stalin to exchange Yakov for the captured Field Marshal Paulus. And to this offer, Stalin is supposed to have uttered his famous phrase, "I am not exchanging a soldier for a field marshal." Yakov later died in the camp, but the circumstances of his death are not very clear. In 1918, about 11 years after the death of his first wife, Yekaterina, Stalin married the 17-year-old Nadezhda Aliyeva, who was the daughter of one of his fellow revolutionaries. Stalin had 2 children out of this wedlock, a son Vasily and daughter Svetlana. However, 13 years into his second wedding, in 1932, his second wife committed suicide by shooting herself. And this had a profound impact on both children. Vasily became a pilot and, over a period of time, became quite influential as one of the Air Force leaders. And he bore the last name Stalin, so contrary to Yakov, Vasily was known as Vasily Stalin. But after the death of his father, Joseph Stalin, Vasily's fortunes took a nosedive, and series after series of altercations with officials and other issues, he was forced to retire from the military. He was arrested for being part of anti-Soviet propaganda and later released, but in the end, he led an ordinary life in an apartment in Moscow with a pension of 300 rubles. Svetlana was only 6 when her mother committed suicide. And interestingly, Joseph Stalin doted on Svetlana, calling her Little Sparrow. But he micromanaged her life, and he ended up being a terror on the domestic front as much as he was on the political front. Svetlana's favorite uncles and aunt were sent to the gallows after being accused of treason, and her boyfriend was sent to an Arctic labor camp because Stalin did not approve. And after Stalin's death, the Soviets continued to interfere in her personal affairs, not allowing her to marry an Indian communist, Brajesh Singh, who she had fallen in love with in the 1960s. Brajesh Singh died of a respiratory illness in 1966, and Svetlana was finally allowed to at least pay a visit to India so she could scatter his ashes in the Ganges. And once she was in India, Svetlana engineered the most dramatic defection to the United States by a top Soviet celebrity. On March 6, 1967, Svetlana stepped into the US Embassy in New Delhi and formally submitted request for asylum. The American administration took some time to decide on her case, and in the meantime, she was holed up in Geneva, Switzerland. But finally, President Lyndon B. Johnson approved the asylum application, and on April 21, 1967, Joseph Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, landed at JFK International Airport. Hafiz al-Assad ruled Syria for nearly 30 years, starting 1971. There are dictators who consider themselves monarchs more than just dictators. Hafiz al-Assad was one of them and was grooming his eldest son, Bashar al-Assad, to be his successor. But in 1994, Bashar al-Assad was killed in an automobile accident, and all of a sudden, the younger sibling, Bashar al-Assad, was thrown into the limelight. Bashar al-Assad graduated from the Damascus University in 1988 with a degree in ophthalmology and worked in a military hospital in Damascus before proceeding to London to continue his medical training. And soon after the death of the elder brother, the younger brother was asked to return to Syria to start getting groomed as a successor to his father. So what does being groomed towards becoming a dictator really entail? Well, in case of Bashar al-Assad, it was first getting military training in the mid-1990s and subsequently taking on various roles in the government. As an example, in the late 90s, Bashar al-Assad was charged with leading Syria's relationship with neighboring Lebanon. And by the time of his father's death in 2000, Bashar al-Assad had risen to the rank of a colonel in the Syrian army. And being the son of the current ruler, he had risen to the rank of the Secretary General of the Ba'ath political party. But there was an obstacle that prevented Bashar al-Assad from assuming presidency upon his father's death. The Syrian constitution had set the minimum age for presidency at 40, and Bashar al-Assad at that time was only 34. So the constitution was hurriedly amended and the minimum age lowered to 34 so Bashar al-Assad could assume the presidency. Well, constitutional amendments are really not a big deal when you are a dictator. Subsequently, in July 2000, Bashar al-Assad won his first 7-year presidential term, winning 97% of support in an election where he was the only candidate. He promised to be a reformer, but soon the dictatorial instinct took over and he ordered a crackdown on anyone presenting opposition to his rule, including journalists and human rights activists. Is it possible for a dictator's son to turn Democrat? When it comes to the Philippines, it seems totally possible. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is the son of ex-Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos, and he recently won the country's presidential elections in a landslide victory. But this happened 36 years after Marcos Sr. was ousted from power. Marcos Jr. is actually a former senator, and he succeeded President Roberto Duterte. So, how did Marcos Jr. achieve it? Well, time was on his side. 36 years is quite a long time where people's memories will fade and a new generation will take over. But Marcos Jr. did clearly state, "Judge me not by my ancestors, but by my actions." But he used PR very effectively to his advantage. Social media was rife with a lot of disinformation campaigns which projected Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in a very positive light, often depicting that during that era, life was by and large peaceful and there were no extrajudicial arrests. But there is another key factor that has contributed to Marcos Jr.'s rise, and that is a loss in faith in democracy in the Philippines. Over the last 3 decades, the Philippines has seen presidential impeachment trials, political protests, corruption. So Marcos Jr. came across as somebody with a possibility of providing stability and leadership. So how has the Marcos Jr. presidency been so far? So far, it's been close to 2 years in his 6-year term, and he has been very assertive with respect to foreign policy, surprising many. He's extended a hand of friendship towards the United States and put up a tougher stance against China. But on the domestic front, his job performance has mostly been average. And that's because he seems to be operating domestically on cruise control. That is just maintaining status quo. What Philippines needs at this time is establishment and promotion of democratic institutions and bold long-term changes that stabilize the political and the economic infrastructure so in the future the country can be run on cruise control. So far, Marcos Jr. has been riding the populist wave. And only time will tell if he will be motivated enough to implement bold decisions or just ride the populist wave and ease himself into a dictatorial term. One of the most brutal dictators in modern times, China's Mao Zedong, had 10 children from 4 wives. A lot of them died young, so we will focus on just 2 who attained some political significance. Mao and Ying was the son of Yang Kai-hui, who was the second wife of Mao Zedong. Yang Kai-hui was executed by the Kuomintang in 1930, and subsequently Mao and Ying and his younger brother escaped to Shanghai. Mao Zedong himself was at the Jiangxi province at the time. In 1936, Mao and Ying and his younger brother went to the Soviet Union, where they were enrolled at the Interdom. The Interdom was a very unique boarding school which was set up in Russia in 1933 to provide a home for the children of revolutionaries around the world. Besides Mao's children, the children of Yugoslavia's Joseph Tito and Spain's La Pasionaria also attended this school. During the Second World War, An Ying successfully petitioned Joseph Stalin to allow him and his brother to join the Soviet Red Army. He graduated from the Franz Military Academy and the Lenin Military Political Academy in 1943 and served as a deputy politics department commander of a tank platoon in the fight against Nazi Germany in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the final Battle of Berlin. After the defeat of Nazi Germany on the European front, An Ying was assigned to the Soviet Far East, where he took part in the Soviet-Japanese War and other initiatives, which finally led him to getting decorated by the Soviet military with the Order of the Red Star. In 1946, Anying returned to China, where he rose to the rank of Major General in the People's Liberation Army. In 1950, when Mao Zedong was at the helm in China, Anying requested to join the People's Volunteer Army as an officer in the Korean War. The commanders were concerned that Mao Zedong's son was joining the army, and so they tried to prevent him. But Mao Zedong overrode them and let his son join the PVA, or the People's Volunteer Army. The PVA commander assigned him as his secretary so that he would stay protected within the PVA headquarters, which were located in caves, which would be safe from any aerial attacks. On November 25, 1950, 4 Douglas B-26 invaders dropped napalm bombs in the area, killing Anying and a fellow officer. Anying's body was charred beyond recognition, and the only way he was identified was through a Soviet watch gifted to him by Joseph Stalin. Though the PVA informed about his death immediately, the Chinese Communist Party leaders like Zhou Enlai withheld the news from Mao Zedong till January of 1951. It was only when Mao Zedong asked that Anying be transferred back to China that he was informed about his death. With his fourth wife, Jiang Xing, Mao Zedong had a daughter named Li Na. She was born in August 1940 and in 1949 moved to Beijing with her parents to start primary school. Li Na did well in her studies, majoring in history at the Peking University, graduating in 1966. After graduation, she took over the job of a writer for the People's Liberation Army Daily. Subsequently, she held top jobs in various newspapers as editor-in-chief as well as head of the military section of the newspapers. In January of 1967, she took up the post of the head of the Central Cultural Revolution team. And subsequently, this was almost a stepping stone into the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, where she became a member of the 10th National Congress of the CCP in 1973. She held the position of the Deputy Secretary of the CCP Beijing Committee from 1975 to 1994. Now, after the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, Mao's closest aides, known as the Gang of Four, were tried for a series of treasonous crimes during the Mao era. And Li Na, being the daughter of one of the members of the Gang of Four, also saw her political fortunes subside. Her political position was abolished and she was assigned to the Security Bureau dormitory by the Central Office. Since then, she mostly faded into oblivion, though every now and then she's made an appearance to commemorate any anniversary associated with Mao Zedong. For example, in May of 2013, she participated in the opening ceremony of a large-scale theme exhibition commemorating the 120th birth anniversary of Mao Zedong. And it is on that note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Through which region did the Dalai Lama enter India in 1959 after he fled Lhasa? The Dalai Lama entered India through the Chitangmu checkpost in Tawang in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. So the answer is A, Arunachal Pradesh. Question for the current episode. Which son of a brutal dictator made a documentary about his father? Was it A. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, B. Vittorio Mussolini, C. Mustafa Khamenei, or D. Marco Antonio Pinochet? Once again, which son of a brutal dictator made a documentary about his father? Was it A. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, B. Vittorio Mussolini, C. Mustafa Khamenei, or D. Marco Antonio Pinochet? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. In the next episode, we'll explore the history of medicine, starting with the ancient times and tracing the evolution into modern times. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.